I am all about characters who are flawed and difficult to deal with, but at no point in the story did I think any of these bitches were friends. First things first, I'm dressed like this because I just had 2 interviews and I didn't feel like changing. Let's talk about some disappointing reads. So the first book I want to talk about today is The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea by Axie. Now this is a YA fantasy romance adventure about a young woman from a fishing village who actually sacrifices herself to a giant dragon that is a messenger and a key member of this underworld in order to save the love of her brother's life, the most beautiful woman in the village who has been chosen to be sacrificed to this beast. So all of this happens on the first 2 pages, so none of it is a spoiler, but the first thing I found challenging about it is because this all happens on the first 2 pages, and then suddenly I was like, okay, we're in it. Now, I totally understand the value of having a hook or having a compelling narrative, but the thing is, when the opening of the book is her already on the way to the ocean, trying to find her brother, trying to prevent her brother who literally is about to try to fight a dragon spirit in order to save his fiance, it gave me no moment to actually care about any of these people. It was supposed to be this high intense thing where you have the brother and his sister. You have the most beautiful woman in the village who has been chosen to be sacrificed and doesn't want to be there, but doesn't want to be the reason that her village gets destroyed. You have the fishermen on the boat who are there simply just to guide these people out and are not looking for a fight. And you have this huge dragon spirit that comes out of the ocean and goes after these women until the sister, the main character of the story, cuts her palm and raises it up to him and says, "Take me." All of this is really exciting. All of this is really compelling. But because it happens so quickly in the first few pages, and when I say first few pages, I mean 5, I felt like I didn't know anything about these characters and I didn't understand why I was supposed to care so much. And before anybody says, oh, this is a YA book, no. There's tons of amazing literature that was primarily written for young adult audiences or has since been adopted as young adult classics. And I think pacing was an issue in this story when in reality, I think even if in the first 10 pages, the first chapter, we could have actually built up a lot of backstory without it just be as this girl is running to the ocean, she's thinking about the village she grew up in. She's thinking about her brother. She's thinking about this young girl and how she always wanted to be as pretty as her, but now realizes the pretty is a curse. In terms of show, don't tell, I felt like it was a lot of tell, and I felt that it just started way too fast. That being said, I think the reason it did that is because the copy that I got, the marketing blurb, was like a young adult romance with Studio Ghibli-esque vibes. And I was like, oh, this is going to be a book that's focused on the world building. And unsurprisingly, the most interesting parts of the plot, the most fun reading I had was reading about the spirit world, reading about the kingdom beneath the sea and the markets and the lanterns and all the various creatures who come out, reading about, this young king who is trapped in these nightmares, this boy king that no one can seem to wake up or really communicate with, and who has this dark hidden secret that is leading to the destruction of the community. All of those things were really fun. And you could tell that when this author, Axie, was talking about the colors and the textures and the scents and the way the water feels, the way how it feels to be able to first breathe underwater, what the dragon's scales and hair and eyes look like. All of those things were beautiful and they were very evocative. I could paint those pictures in my head. But because that was so excellent, the pretty traditional, predictable plot, the very, I'm going to say kind of bland buildup between the main character, this sister, and the person that ends up being her love interest. Some of the dialogue and some of the way the action is written really just wasn't hitting the spot for me. It was not a book that I disliked enough to stop finishing. I did finish it. But when I got to the end and, the big twist was revealed, I was more of like, oh, okay. I really did not feel like I had an emotional stake in these characters, and I really did not feel that even the moments in which I wanted to lean in, I'm like, oh my God, he's grabbing her as she runs away, like, oh my gosh, she's about to get captured by this assassin in the woods. Like the moments that I'm supposed to be in it, fearing the shadow from the corner of the room who's trying to kill her, all I could think about was, who are these people? There's nothing wrong with following a traditional plot structure. There's nothing wrong with having, a girl and a guy appear on page together and then being like, cool, those are love interests. I'm not asking her to reinvent the wheel here, but I really felt this was a book that cared more about environment an atmosphere that it cared about the actual characters. Because while the main character does, learn or realizes her own beauty, while she does learn/realize that she is capable of receiving romantic love and being chosen and things of that nature, she doesn't really evolve. Like throughout the whole plot, she's hardy, she's brave, she cares deeply about her family and her community, and she cares deeply about doing the right things. And all of those things are very sympathetic character traits. She's someone that I feel like would probably be a great friend. But when there isn't this, real conflict at the heart of the character beyond what's going on outside, I sometimes find is not a very compelling story. Yes, I want her to break the curse on the Boy King. Yes, I want her and the man she's dancing around to fall in love. Yes, I want the riddle to be solved, the truth of what happened to be revealed. But again, more for just the sake of knowing, not because I'm genuinely invested in the story. So if you're someone who likes beautiful descriptions, if you're someone who likes kind of fantasy, YA, romance, adventure, I think you might like The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea. But for me, it was a pretty disappointing read. The next book that was a very disappointing read, definitely the worst of this little bunch, is Nothing But Blackened Teeth. Now, Nothing But Blackened Teeth is quite small. It's more of like a novella, and it's a horror novella. And even though I'm a huge horror movie fan, I really haven't gotten to that many horror books. So I thought this would be a good place to start. The reason I was attracted to this book is because based on what I read about it, it was kind of a critique, kind of a send up of classic horror movie tropes in the same vein as The Cabin in the Woods or the Scary Movie. Not as farcical, but the Scary Movie series, or more specifically, the Scream series, Scream and Cabin in the Woods, because both of those are movies that are horror films that are looking to shock you, to surprise you, to get your heart pumping, but are also within the plot critiquing certain tropes of Western horror, critiquing certain ideas around who's the comic relief and who's the hero and who dies first, and especially when it comes to Western and specifically American horror films, all of the morality around, the teenagers who have sex are the ones that die in the Halloween movies. So I was really looking forward to this. I thought this was going to be totally up my alley. And in my opinion, it is some of the worst writing that I have ever read. This author is incredibly, I was going to say obsessed with, invested in adding metaphors to every other sentence of the page. Nobody could just smile or speak or run or start or fear. It was like her smile was like this. His body was like this, doughy but still warm. The house was like this. It was heavy as grief and as wet as the tears on your cheek. Like every single page, it was just metaphor after metaphor after metaphor. And I love a good metaphor, but it gets to a point where I'm like, can you just tell me what's happening? Like, does everything have to have this flowery connection, this highbrow way of explaining it? Can you just say that he smirked as opposed to, the corner of his mouth curled up like a flower curling in the heat? That's not a real one, but like that's basically how she writes. The other thing I found challenging about this is that it didn't actually subvert any of the expectations of a classic horror book or a classic horror story. Yes, you had, the broad-shouldered, bright-smiled, handsome guy. Yes, you had the misunderstood loner with mental health issues. Yes, you had the perfect couple that you think is perfect, but deep down they have their issues. But everything worked out pretty much as one would expect it to. And it also was, a bit of a challenging read because they get to a point in the story where they pretty much accept, okay, this house is haunted. By the way, this is a group of friends, they treat each other terribly, friends who go to stay in a haunted house in Japan for the aforementioned couple's like little engagement party. They get to a point very quickly where they're like, okay, this house is haunted, done. But then the way they act, like the way that they act is, to me, it is so nonsensical because there are so many things that they do that are clearly just to keep the plot forward, despite the fact that the characters amongst themselves are talking about horror films. They're like, oh, in a movie, this is what would happen, or oh, in a movie, here's the person that would survive. So we're already aware that you are falling into some of these tropes and falling into some of these ruts that have been created by previous characters and other horror films and other horror stories. And then you do it anyway? Like, I almost feel like this book would have been better if we had taken out entirely all the conversations about horror films, all the conversations about, the comic relief and the hot guy and the things like that, and these were just people in this experience. Because when you're trying to add this meta type of narrative on top of it, then I'm expecting you to do something unique with it. Cabin in the Woods is actually probably a better connection to Nothing But Blackened Teeth, because Cabin in the Woods specifically talks about archetypes and why these archetypes exist and why people are supposed to die or not die in a certain order. So I feel like this book had a lot of potential. I mean, there are so many Japanese horror films like Ringu, so many Japanese horror films like Shudder that are some of my favorites. I think some really amazing stories about yokai, about demons, about spirits, about just mythological creatures coming out of Japan. I think there's so much material there to work with. And this book was just ultimately very disappointing. And I am not someone who needs all of my characters to be likable. I am all about an unreliable narrator. I am all about characters who are flawed and difficult to deal with. But at no point in the story did I think any of these bitches were friends. These people hated each other. They treated each other horribly. And maybe that's just a testament to my friends and my friend group, but I have a hard time understanding how a group of people who are clearly this deeply unhappy together, to the point of like jealousy and anger and, you know, mental health shaming, all these things, why would they even be at a house together in the first place? And I understand that it sometimes is taboo to critique a plot device without which the story wouldn't exist, but I just found so little to be redeeming about this book. The next book I want to talk about, speaking of unlikable characters and unreliable narrators, is actually a nonfiction book and the first audiobook I have ever fully listened to, and that is Hey Hun by Emily Lynn Paulson. Now, Hey Hun is about MLM, which, if you are unaware, is multi-level marketing, not men loving men. Although if it was men loving men, it would have been more interesting. The thing about this book is that it is an inside look at an anonymous MLM, but it's probably Rodan and Fields. And it's not just an inside look, such as from LuLaRoe, the Lululemon documentary, or other books or videos. It's an inside look on someone who actually was a success story. Someone who was 1/2 of 1%, to the point that she got to a point in her career where she really didn't have to work anymore on trying to sell products or trying to recruit people. She had enough of a downline and enough of people beneath her that she was literally getting over $100,000 a year, tens of thousands of dollars a month. She was getting cards and, you know, vacations and flown out, all these things for essentially doing nothing. Now, the strengths of this book are Emily Lynn Paulson talks about the role alcohol plays at these conferences, at these workshops, at these selling parties. She talks about her struggles to get sober and some of the incredible community she found in the MLMs of people supporting her in her alcohol journey. She met some really great friends, some people that she's still friends with to this day, even though she has left the organization. And she does admit that there is a sense of community, that there is a sense of very specific in-group communication, using some of these vocab words like upline and downline, but just the value of feeling a part of something. And I do think she makes a good point of bringing up what research has told us, that the majority of people in these MLMs tend to be like army wives or stay-at-home moms or single moms, people who are not just looking for financial stability. For the record, you will almost never get financial stability from a multi-level marketing scheme. I mean, you could just look at the stats, but also friends, sisters, you know, the idea of community, boss babes, this combination of like capitalism, hustle culture, CEO, very lean in, having it all, a family, a husband, kids, this, that, and the other. I think those narratives are valuable to discuss. I think that she definitely succeeded in cultivating more empathy in me for some of the women who fall into these things and how they can be so difficult to leave, how a lot of these MLMs use cult tactics. And she actually referenced the book Cultish, which is on my TBR next. And I learned a lot about language, about morality, about ostracizing you from your other community and friends in order to keep you more ingrained in an institution. I learned a lot about how QAnon and very heavy conspiracy theories tend to flow in these MLM spaces because you're so used to only trusting people within your community. So if someone on your team, if someone you respect who like has the white Mercedes, who's getting flown out on these trips, says, hey, you should check those vaccines for autism, their people are more likely to believe them. There's a lot to unpack here. But the reason this was a disappointing read is, first, it actually was more focused on gossip, on name calling and who was cheating on whom and what outfits someone wore and what trips they went on, than the actual substance of, this is what the MLM is about, this is why I got in, here are the choices that I made to succeed, and here's the harm that I caused. It's much more focused. Like, I promise you, she spent more time describing her outfits at each of these events than really taking responsibility for all of the people that she manipulated, and in some cases, like, emotionally harassed in order to get them on her team. In addition, this book should be taken with a grain of salt, in my opinion, because even when Emily Lynn Paulson is explaining how she was calling people at midnight trying to get that last sale, how she was buying bulk products herself, thousands of dollars of products, in order to hit that line, even though she had nowhere to offload them. Even when she was talking about the ways in which there was a hierarchy, a very strict hierarchy at conferences, and like jealousy and backstabbing and all these things, even when she was talking about the ways that she participated in that culture, it always felt like she was setting herself apart. Like, she was bad, but she would never, make a woman cry if they couldn't make their sales. Like, she did and said some wrong things, but it wasn't like she was cheating on her husband like those other hussies at the conferences. Like, there always felt like a distance every time she would admit that she made a wrong choice, or she hurt someone, or, got in a fight with her husband over how much money she was spending. It always was framed against, well, Becky's doing this, Emily's doing this, Rachel's doing this, all fake names, of course. And at least I'm not stumbling into a Zoom meeting drunk after being dropped off by some man who's not my husband in a pickup truck. So it felt oddly not like other girls, despite the fact that the only way she could succeed in this company is by doing all the same things that they did. Another thing I found challenging about it was that in the tagline from this book, it mentions supremacy. And I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of overlap between white supremacy and hustle culture, a lot of overlap between what a family is supposed to look like and how that is informed by white supremacist ideology. There are so many ways that we could talk about direct selling, about businesses, about how white supremacy, although it does benefit white women, is often focused on white malehood. I was so ready to really dig into that. And it felt like an afterthought. It really felt like something that an editor or a publisher was like, hey, you got to throw in some race stuff. We're in the DEI age. And she dropped a couple, notes here and there, a few sentences that said things that, based on my research, are true, but weren't fleshed out, weren't developed, and felt almost not written in her own voice. Like, because this audiobook was her. It was her narrating her own book. So you'd hear her talking about this and that and da-da-da-da-da, and then we'd get to a line or two about supremacy, and it felt like she was reciting something off a teleprompter. So it was very clear to me that this actually wasn't a place of expertise for her. And to her credit, she does say, like, hey, I voted for Republicans and Democrats. I do this and this. I'm not on one side or another. I'm no anti-racist expert. I don't think you need to be an anti-racist expert to do research on white supremacy and how it relates to your story, to hire consultants, to work with an editor that has expertise in that field or has familiarity with that field. It just, if you're going to add supremacy as one of the taglines in your book about multi-level marketings, I expect you to talk about white supremacy and actually talk about it, not just sprinkle it in there. And the final thing I found challenging about this book was the very last sections. So something that she talks about throughout the story is her struggles with alcoholism. And she has now been in recovery and she is sober, which is amazing. Addiction is a disease, and I am genuinely happy that she is working to manage that. However, she has transitioned out of multi-level marketing into coaching. And now coaching can be a field in which you have a lot of training and certifications. Coaching can also be a field in which you just say you're a life coach and just give people advice. And she does make a note to point out all the trainings that she's done. But I found it kind of strange. And in some ways, I find it unethical, even though I think there's nuance here, that she built a huge online social media audience from portraying herself as the perfect MLM marketer, from portraying herself as this rich and successful and happy person who was dealing with all of these conferences and sales and business call on the beach, this, that, and the other. She built a whole community from that. then built an entire community and separate brand based on leaving the MLMs. And then that is the audience that supported her through her first book, who is supporting her through her second book. And hey, I listen to it on Spotify, so I'm supporting in some way too. But that's also the same community of people who then followed her to the Sober Mom Squad, which is a website community that she built, and that, as far as I understand, that she runs, that's around helping women with addiction and helping women, find sober coaches and finding people to talk to. This type of work, this type of community building work, this type of addiction work, things of that nature, it costs money. It costs money to maintain a website. It costs money to hire trained facilitators, trained coaches. I have not gotten into this company, so I don't know how good it is. It costs money to do those things, and I get that. But it made me feel very weird to read that she was like, I'm out of MLMs. I've learned, I've grown. I don't do that anymore. And by the way, you can also spend upwards of $300 a month to join my online community of Sober Mom Squad, in which, you're with us, you're with the girls, we get it, the wine mom, the long nights will help you through this, and also no refunds. So it is not the same as an MLM. She is not hiring people to sell for her. She's not hiring people to be in her direct line, and she is offering a service, not a physical product. And again, I think that people should be paid for their work. It's not a matter of doing this pro bono. It just felt very weird to me that, again, she built this whole brand on being part of an exclusive insular community that prioritizes a particular type of feminism, that prioritizes a particular type of girl bosshood. She then spends years in this multi-level marketing, racking in the money, disrupting people's friendships, disrupting people's lives, ostracizing herself from anybody in her life who had questions or critiqued it, buying tons and tons and tons of product. Like, she made a ton of money, but she also spent a ton of money too, trying to keep up this farce. All of these things to build this brand, and then be like, actually, it was all a lie. I'm changed. I'm completely different now. Follow me on this new journey as part of this different brand of the Sober Moms. It makes me feel a little icky. I'm not saying that people can't change. I'm not saying that people can't grow. I'm not saying that people don't deserve to be paid for a service that they're providing. I believe all of those things, and I genuinely want to believe that she has grown and evolved. But based from her own book and her own words, it felt like she was much happier pointing the finger at other women in her community, other women who worked in MLMs, and say, I did some bad things, but I wasn't that bad. I said and did this, but it wasn't like I said and did this. It made me feel strange. So while if you are someone who wants the tea, wants the gossip, wants to know about the clothes and the hotel room, and are the parties really fun, and do you actually get that white car as a gift? Spoiler alert, you don't. You have to you have to make payments on, it's not a free car. If you want to know the truth around the upper echelon of earners in these MLMs, and you like all those dirty stories, this could be a very good book for you. And there were moments where I was quite entertained by some of the shenanigans that these people get into. But if you're looking for a real critique of MLMs that is rooted in psychology, that's rooted in unethical business practices, if you're looking to understand what it's like for an individual to leave an MLM, I think there are other resources out there for people who talk about deprogramming and talk about cult language more specifically. This really felt to me more like a mean rich girl's memoir about how she got herself in a situation in which she was making a lot of money and supposedly living the high life, but deep down was very unfulfilled and trying to cover that with alcohol. And then now, is the phoenix from the ashes, and now has her books and her other platform and all the money that she earned in the MLM to support her ventures, and now everything's great. I don't know. It's a difficult story for me to empathize with, and I feel like there was better ways that she could have gone about it while still being hopefully true to herself and her story. So those were a few books I read recently that I found pretty disappointing, albeit in different ways. I'll leave all of them in the description. Keeping my promise, I did tell you my next video would actually be about books. And as always, I'll see you next time. Bye.